Welcome to Tea with the Experts and Dr. Leah Merle, your premier destination for mental health insights, empowerment, and inspiration. Led by the passionate therapist and counselor educator, Dr. Leah Merle, this interview-style podcast delves deep into diverse themes with top-notch experts in the field. Beginning with the What Is series, from anxiety, trauma to resilience and mindfulness. We sip our way through captivating conversations, psychological insights, shedding light on the complexities of mental wellness and what it means to be a human being. Each episode serves up a refreshing blend of knowledge, empathy, and empowerment, aiming to destigmatize mental health issues and raise awareness in an engaging and approaching manner. So grab your favorite cuppa and get ready to step yourself into transformative conversations that will leave you feeling uplifted and enlightened. Subscribe now and join the movement to break down barriers and foster a more compassionate world.
Back. In this fascinating episode of Tea with the Experts, I sit down with Adam Davis, co-founder of Game to Grow, which is a 501c3 that's dedicated to using games for therapeutic, educational, and community building purposes. Adam, who's one of the creative minds behind the innovative game Critical Core, specializes in TTRPGs as tools for social and emotional development. So in this episode, myself, Dr. Leah Merle, and Adam are going to really explore how these games are used to help individuals build social skills, manage anxiety, develop resilience, lessen depression symptomology. So from the basics of collaborative storytelling and role-playing, this episode really offers insight into a cutting-edge approach to a therapeutic process, or just somebody who's interested in creative and therapeutic techniques. This conversation is absolutely jam-packed with inspiration and practical, and settle in and join us as we explore how games can really be more than just fun. They can be transformative tools for growth. Don't forget to subscribe of mental health and innovation. So welcome back to the show. This is Tea with the Experts. I'm your host, Dr. Leah Merle, and I have a fantastic guest with us today. This is Adam Davis. Hello, Adam. Good to see you.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
It is a pleasure. Thank you for coming on the show. I'm so excited to talk to you today about Game to Grow and Critical Core. So we'll kind of get started a little bit. I know Adam from years and years ago. We were kind of affiliated through the Antioch system. And so I've been kind of watching this growth of the company that you've been building. And I'm super excited to talk with you today. So why don't you kind of start off by telling us a little bit about your journey personally and how you came to co-found Game to Grow?
Sure. Gosh, my journey to this place started a long time ago. As you know, I got my master's degree in drama therapy from Antioch.
Yeah.
So this understanding of the power of collaborative storytelling, this idea that when we come together and we share stories, we can make ourselves more confident and more creative, and we can build community together. So I started my journey into applied theater in undergrad, studying political theater in Africa. I can really trace some of what Game to Grow is doing now to applied theater, collaborative storytelling that I was learning in Durban, South Africa in 2004. And so I was learning about this thing called Theater of the Oppressed, Augusta Boal, Theater of the Oppressed, this kind of collaborative storytelling, improvised theater, this empowerment work that's possible to be done through collaborative storytelling. So I was always really interested in this kind of work, in healing communities and healing individuals with the power of storytelling, and really going into communities and cultivating their stories, right? Not sharing my stories and sharing my wisdom as an expert, but really helping people tell their own story and feel like they're the hero in their own story. So bring that forward all the way to grad school. I was in grad school, like a lot of us, looking for side jobs because grad school is both expensive and time consuming. So I happened to be doing some volunteer work, and then I was asked by Jason Franklin, who's a therapist here in the Seattle area. And Jason said, "You're not by chance a dungeon master, are you? Because there's a thing over here that you might be interested in." And I said, "Well, I actually turns out I know what you're talking about. I do know what a dungeon master is. Dungeon master, for those of you that aren't aware, is the term used for someone who's facilitating a game of Dungeons and Dragons. So it's a type of storytelling game where there are rules. Players sit around, each one playing a character, and their goal is sort of creating a collaborative story together in a world of might, mystery, and magic. They get to fight with swords and cast spells and defeat monsters and things like that. There's a lot more to it than that, but basically, so I agreed and I took on this role as a dungeon master for this sort of after school program, and it was really working with a lot of kids who needed social support. So a lot of kids, and I say kids, but I really mean teens, adolescents, and emerging adults who all needed some extra kind of social support. They'd never really had friend groups before. They'd never really had community before. So a lot of the parents, this is the only time that kid looked forward to leaving their house, was to go play role-playing games in this particular group. And at the time, I was studying drama therapy, and understanding drama therapy as the systematic and intentional application of drama games and activities for insight, growth, and change. Well, guess what? Turns out role-playing games are a drama game or activity. It turns out that you can use Dungeons and Dragons as drama therapy. So I was there understanding, getting all the training in drama therapy, understanding that it could be useful for Dungeons and Dragons. And at the time, my co-facilitator at the time left. It's a high turnover industry, this kind of social support program for kids who need extra help. So it turned out that I needed to help find a new person, just like Jason helped me get this job. Needed to find a new person, and I was in graduate school at Antioch University, Seattle, with Adam Johns, and he and I both named Adam. We're friends, both total geeks. I thought he would be a perfect person to co-lead this program. So got him the gig, and then we started just brainstorming, thinking about it. We were running that program, the Dungeons and Dragons program, and an improv class, both back to back, and really thinking about how we design our improv sessions for connection, how we design our improv sessions for collaboration. Oh my gosh, all of that can also be done with Dungeons and Dragons. So anyway, it kind of just took off right there, and we decided that we were had our toe in the pool of something that was deep and powerful, and so that's where we went from there to launch what we called Wheelhouse Workshop, which was the 2-person organization that Adam and I ran for about 4 years before we transitioned into the nonprofit sector with Game to Grow.
Wow, what a story. I love that story. I also didn't know that Jason Franklin, who I adore, was actually the individual that kind of got you started with this. So, hello?
Funny thing about Jason's actually the person who told me about drama therapy. I was in a play with Jason in the green room, and I was a drama teacher at the time. And I said, you know what? I really love teaching drama, but what I don't love about teaching drama is helping kids become child actors. What I really love working with the kids who don't want to be there, and I'm helping them build their confidence and understand the value of collaboration and ensemble. And he was like, Adam, that's called drama therapy, and they have that program at Antioch. And so Jason gets a lot of credit. I haven't actually talked to Jason in well over probably a decade, but Jason gets a lot of credit for my entire professional journey, because we never know those little things we say to the random person in the green room, how that can put you on a path. So
It's so true. And I feel like we're just all connected in the Seattle kind of Pacific Northwest area in this field, right? We all know each other. And Jason is one of those wonderful, wonderful humans. So he's a supervisor and in private practice too. So I always refer over towards him. But I'm wondering about, obviously you've shared the story, and it's the Adams, right? Adam and Adam, the 2 Adams as we refer to you in the field. But maybe for listeners that are not familiar, can you really explain a little bit more about tabletop role-playing games. Can you talk about that and what that looks like? And I think I'm saying this right. TTRPGs, is that right?
Yes.
Am I? Okay.
So that's a great question. This is actually something we talk about in our trainings as well. So we do a lot of trainings, some with people who've played TTRPGs, tabletop role-playing games, since the 1970s when they first came out, and some people who first heard about it because of Stranger Things on Netflix. So there's a whole wide range of this. So it's been a really interesting thing to watch how this genre has evolved and how the cultural response to it has evolved. So this genre came out in the 1970s originally. It was sort of a response to the cultural movements in the 1970s. It was Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. You probably weren't expecting me to give you the full the full download. But they created this thing called Dungeons and Dragons, and it was really built out of tactical wargaming. They were playing a lot of tactical war games in the 1970s, and they wanted there to be a story that followed characters, where they were used to be, you move pieces around, minions around a board, like in a game of almost like Risk, right? But now they were like, who is this person, and what is their story, and how do they change over the course of this game that we're playing? So they created a whole genre of game called tabletop role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons being kind of the first thing. So much so that some people will talk about Dungeons and Dragons and actually mean a different game. It's kind of like when I say I'm going to Xerox something and I'm going to do it on my Hewlett-Packard, right? It's because that was the first game. Or like I say, can you hand me a Kleenex? And you reach over and you grab me a Puffs, right? Dungeons and Dragons is the Kleenex or the Xerox of the genre. So anyway, this style of game basically features a couple of really interesting things. Generally, there's a group of people sitting around a table. Everyone has their own what's called a character sheet in front of them. And that character sheet has their character's name. It has their character's special abilities. And some of these games are set in fantasy worlds. So they might say they're an elf. It might say they're a wizard. It might say they're a dwarf. It might say they're a barbarian, right? It might say all kinds of things about their character. And it also talks about their character's abilities, right? Their strength, their dexterity, their constitution, their intelligence, their wisdom, and their charisma. It might be their attributes is what it's called in the game. And those things define what you're good at, what you're not so good at, and how the rules of the game determine your success or failure when your character wants to do something. So there's this other character or other player in the game called a dungeon master or a game master, and their job is to sort of set the scenes that happen in the story, describe the world, and set up the characters' encounters in the game. So they might say something like, your characters are all questing after the son of a noble who's gone missing. They're looking for him. They've been hired, promised to be paid handsomely if they can track down this missing person. So you've all been questing, the parents of this missing person gave you a map where they thought that he was headed. So that's where you're going right now. You're trudging through the woods. You're camping by firelight, questing after this X on this map, where maybe it's treasure, but you're hoping you can find some footsteps along the path looking for this missing noble. And as you travel, you're finally you're through the woods. You know that the X is not too far from where you are. And as you emerge from the woods, you see that there's a deep cavern. You know you need to cross that cavern. It looks pretty deep, hundreds of feet deep, hundreds of feet across. And you're about to give up hope when your characters look just a little bit to the east and they see that there's what looks like a rickety rope bridge. Your characters walk over to this rickety rope bridge thinking they can cross the canyon to get to their quarry, to get to the reward that's on the other side. And you notice that this bridge is it's well worn. Some of the rope is frayed. Some of the planks of wood are missing. You know you need to cross this bridge, this rickety rope bridge. What do your characters do next? And now this is where the players, who each have their own character sheet that describes what their character's good at and what they're not so good at, they look at their character sheet and they see what their characters can do to overcome this obstacle to get closer to their goal. So now a player might look at their character sheet and think, wow, gosh, my character is an acrobat. So they can just cross this rickety bridge. They don't need any help, right? But then you've only got one of your heroes across, and this is a collaborative game with a group of heroes who all have to get across. So then the dwarf says, well, I'm not an acrobat. I'm a blacksmith. I'm short in stature. I can't just cross the bridge. Well, then the other player says, well, my character used to be a sailor, and I'm actually really good at tying knots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie some rope over here to this tree and then shoot a bow and arrow across the bridge, and then it'll stick to the tree on the other side. And then we have some support. So anyway, then the players are all working together to creatively solve this problem to get to the other side. Then the game master describes what happens when they try to cross this bridge, success or otherwise, because the game also features, and for people who are watching, there's a lot of dice involved in tabletop role-playing games. So there's 20-sided dice, 12-sided dice, 10-sided dice, 8, 6, 4-sided dice. So the players roll dice to see if they're successful or not. So the player who has to carefully cross the bridge has to roll dice and then tell the game master what they rolled, and how high that roll is might mean that they fall. They're hanging now from the bridge. How do you get across now? Does the arrow hit the tree on the other side? Does that not hold? All these things have a conditional success or failure based on dice rolls. And then after the players overcome that bridge, they get to the next obstacle. There's new things that happens, all described by the game master. So there's this like sequence of scenes that happens. The players are describing what they want their characters to do. And there's, of course, like crossing bridges, but there's also like social encounters. There's combat encounters. Sometimes there might be monsters. Magical monsters like dragons that the characters have to fight in battle. And then it's more tactical and more high stakes. And sometimes you're at an inn trying to barter for a low rate for a night in the inn. And sometimes the game master will then be speaking as their character, as that character, the innkeeper, talking in voices. And my background as an actor and drama therapist, I encourage all of our trainees to use voices. Oh, welcome to Handsome Harphrase. I'll give you a discount, sure, if you go chop the lumber in the back. Right? There's different ways to do that.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe that I haven't engaged with this before. I'm like, wow, what's been going on? But you're talking a lot about skill development, specifically for teens, adolescents, emerging adults, which we know is a really, really helpful modality. So tell me more about the skills that you see folks develop in your experience, your long history now. And like, it's obviously, builds empathy as well. But tell me a little bit about the skills that you see that are built.
Sure. So as we talked up to our trainees about this, really looking at how do we help our clients, our participants, our players become more confident, more creative, and more socially capable, we look at it in terms of the building blocks for social connection. Because a lot of the times when those of us that work with kids, teens, or adolescents who need some social support, we think about this in terms of teaching, right? We think, how do I teach them how to be socially adept? And teaching is often not the thing that's necessary. We sometimes get into a pickle where we say, oh, this person is not engaging socially. I bet I need to teach them how to make eye contact, right? I need to teach them how to make a good first impression. Yeah. But so many of the youth that I've worked with for my decade plus have been in those training programs. They know the rules, and I'm air quoting, they know the rules of social engagement. They know how to make age-appropriate and socially acceptable behaviors. But what they haven't had is an opportunity to feel like that matters, to feel like it's rewarding, and to feel like they actually have the benefits of social connection. So oftentimes what's necessary for that is not this sort of knowledge dimension of that kind of support. It is the performance dimension and the fluency dimension, right? We care about getting them to do the thing. So how do we build socially reinforcing spaces in the first place? Not laboratory settings where we say, oh, you made eye contact, have a ring pop, right? Because that's not how the world works. How do we say, wow, being with other people is actually life enriching? How do we say it's really worth it to push through challenging times with people, because oftentimes relationships have rocky places, and that's okay, and it actually makes the relationships better, yes. Right? So one of the first things we focus on is regulation, right? If you can't be regulated, you can't be present with yourself or anybody else. And what's really nice about tabletop role-playing games is, like I said, there's dice. And that means that there's often this extra, outside of your locus of control. There is some stuff that just plain happens. And our job is to navigate that. And one of the things that we really want to build with our participants is sometimes life is actually a lot more interesting when things don't go perfectly. And what are the opportunities embedded in those challenge moments? How do we teach our people how to fail forward, right? To see opportunities in the obstacles. And so sometimes, when we have a game like Dungeons and Dragons, players often roll their 20-sided dice, and that determines how successful they are, if they're successful or not successful. And there's this thing in the game called critical successes, where if you roll a 20 on your 20-sided die, it's extra awesome. And if you roll a 1 on your 20-sided die, it's extra awful, right? There is an additional setback, and sometimes it is spectacular to fail. So much so that oftentimes in my groups, players would feel like the worst response was a 2, because a 1 would have been really exciting, because 1 is a spectacular failure, right? It is something like extra interesting, extra exciting. Sometimes that's funny, right? And I've had players, right, who needed to convince an army that they needed to rally to argue, to protect the kingdom from an oncoming swarm of zombies or something, right? And so the player is up there like rolling their dice to see how convincing their rallying cry could be, and they get a 1, right? So what happens when you spectacularly fail trying to rally this troop, right? This army? And I've had players say, they get to describe sometimes themselves what it looks like when they fail spectacularly. And so I have these sometimes kids who have a lot of, negative experiences being social. They get to own their own story here. And they say, well, I'm up there, I'm trying to rally the troops, and I farted. And now this is their story, and it's funny, right? You laughed, they laugh, their compatriots at the table laugh with them, right? With them, not at them. So there's a lot of this a joy in what it is to not be successful that makes it okay to not be successful, and also interesting to not be successful, and necessary to not be successful. So that is often a first thing we do is we work on regulation.
Yeah.
What the most foundational, what we call our core capacities. The other interesting thing about this game, right, the second core capacity is collaboration. Because in my little example of crossing the bridge, one person crosses the bridge, the story doesn't continue. Every player has to get across the bridge. We have to do this together as a team. So how can we build on each other's ideas? So as a drama therapist, we talked about improv, right? So there's a lot of ensemble work that is important in this line of work, but it's also important in being social, in interacting socially with other people. It is not just what am I doing, but what are we doing? And how can I not just work with you and not just divide our labor, but how can we actually build on each other's ideas to do something we wouldn't be capable of doing by ourselves? So there's a lot to collaboration as distinctly different from cooperation, right? Or compromise. A lot of times when we see young people who need social support, we say, well, you need to compromise, right? And what does compromise often mean? Compromise means give up just enough of what you want to avoid conflict.
Yes.
And then we're framing social interaction as, well, it's lose-lose.
Yeah.
You're giving up some of what you want so that you don't have to be denied or rejected. But then why would you want to be with another person if it's fundamentally connected to an act of loss, right? So reframing this as collaboration, what can we do to give our ideas and share our ideas and celebrate the ideas of others? And then our ideas are the group's ideas, not my ideas and your ideas now, but our ideas. And then we can now be excited about the shared story and the shared connections that we have. And we often talk about how inside jokes are the testament of a friendship, of a community, of the shared cultural language. So once we really build this collaboration idea, I've had groups that have their own shared stories now, right? They have reference points that they can talk about. That's only possible because they decided those things together. They came up with these things together. And I can do things like, we're going to name the tavern you're going into in this town, right? You're going to name this tavern, and you're going to give me a color, you're going to give me an adjective, and you're going to give me an animal, right? So then they go into the tavern, which is called the Shiny Purple Squirrel. And now you've got, so we got a Shiny Purple Squirrel is the name of the tavern. It's the most famous restaurant in town. The Shiny Purple Squirrel. And there's a big statue of a Shiny Purple Squirrel, and everybody rubs its tummy when they go in the restaurant, for good luck. So you can see this statue is kind of worn down in the middle, right? This is something that we made up on the spot, and now it's theirs. They own it, and they own the Shiny Purple Squirrel, right? And so they have now this cultural reference point, which is a testament to their ability to be social with each other. There's also planning, perspective, and pretend play are the other capacities we work on with our participants. And planning is really logical sequencing. It's the idea that if I want to cross this bridge, what are the obstacles in the way? What are so I want to kind of game this out a little bit. I want to base this on my previous knowledge. And I want to remember, this is something that's really important for a lot of the youth we work with, is flexibility. Cognitive flexibility comes with understanding that just because a certain sequence of events led to a certain outcome in the past doesn't necessarily mean that the next time that exact logical sequence happens, that same outcome's going to happen. Also, just because this outcome happened doesn't mean it was caused by that same logical sequence. And this is how we can really be flexible in the moment, understand that sort of gray area thinking. It's so important for a lot of our young people. And then perspective, we talk about the fact that you're playing a character, right? You have to think about what you know and what your character knows, and what you know your fellow players know, and what you know your fellow players know that their characters know, and what your character knows about what another character knows, right? So there's all of this showing up to say, well, I know your character is a sailor, but would my character know that your character is a sailor? Did your character tell me that your character is a sailor? I wonder if we could make up a story about how your character would have told my character that your character is a sailor, so that my character can suggest to your character that you tie a knot, right? There's all of these moments where we have to think about what we know and what other people know, that theory of mind skill, which is so important because we often forget what other people know about what we know, and we take things personally when we think that someone knows what's going on in our internal world, but oftentimes they have no idea. And then the final of the core capacities we talk about is pretend play. And pretend play really is the magical playground where all the other core capacities go to play. So pretend play is really understanding that sort of magic circle of where we are right now. It doesn't have the performance anxiety. It doesn't have the perfection demands, the performance demands that real life has. So how can we engage in this sort of experimental space to try new things, to not be attached to outcomes, and to find joy, like I said earlier, to find joy in the unexpected, humor, all of those, the things that make life joyous.
Yes. And it's so, oh my gosh, it's so complicated. There's a lot of complexity that you've just kind of walked through, lots of different layers, which is great. I mean, you speak in my love language when you talk about regulation. You talk about emotional regulation, especially when working with teens, right? Because that's a lot of why they're struggling in the world and within relationships. So I love the fact that that's kind of a part of what you do. Let's talk about critical core. Tell me all about critical core, how it's designed, how it supports folks, how it's therapeutic. Let's go there.
So Critical Core is a beginner's box for tabletop role-playing games played in the style of Game to Grow. So what we had done is historically taken Dungeons and Dragons and just modified the rules, right? We played a simplified version of Dungeons and Dragons for years. We ignored rules we didn't want to use. We ignored parts of the story and the lore we didn't want to use. We made up our own stories adjacent to the world of Dungeons and Dragons. And so we were already kind of modifying this. And there's ways that people have done this around the world. And historically, the makers of Dungeons and Dragons had this thing called the Open Gaming License that allowed people to basically make their own versions, so to speak, of tabletop role-playing games built on the core foundations of Dungeons and Dragons. So what happened in 2018, I think it was, maybe 2017, is I received an email from Virginia Spielman saying, hey, we kind of want to build this beginner's box. They were based out of Hong Kong, and it turns out Virginia, who's now a good friend of mine, was working with some folks in Hong Kong, and there was actually an ad agency in Hong Kong that wanted to build something to support the autistic community in Greater China. And so they had this idea of doing something to support the autistic community in China. And then because they were in Hong Kong and that's where Virginia was at the time, they were talking to Virginia about how do we support the autistic community. And she had seen her son go through those kinds of social skills training programs that I had talked about and not gotten much out of it, but then played Dungeons and Dragons and then come into his own. He knew himself better. And this was just Dungeons and Dragons. It wasn't intentionally facilitated Dungeons and Dragons, but she knew as an occupational therapist what was really happening. So she reached out to then Adam and I to collaborate on something. And so we built Critical Core out of that. It was actually Virginia that gave it its name, Critical Core. And what we built was, what has Adam and Adam been doing? And how do we align that with now these theories and principles that we have talked about in such a way that it can be given out? So the continued backstory here is Adam and I were actually keynote presenters at the Washington Association of Marriage and Family Therapy talking about tabletop role-playing games, right? So we had an auditorium full of therapists, and we were talking about the theory and the principles behind therapeutically applied tabletop role-playing games. We talked about developmental and relational, scaffolded and aesthetically distanced play-based narrative transference, right? There was good, big words. All the therapists were nodding along. You know, my memory, they're like shaking their fists, like fist pumping. They're so excited about this. And we had all these therapists came up afterwards, right? And they said, I want to do this. I have clients I think would be such good candidates for this kind of work. I've never played Dungeons and Dragons before. What do I do? And at that time, 2017, 2018, we said, well, you're going to have to learn how to play. And learning how to play Dungeons and Dragons means going to a game store, picking up a book, learning the rules, which are complicated, and then you're going to play for a while with some friends, maybe. Then your friends play, they don't. Okay, well, you're going to have to find some friends who play. You're going to play, and then you're going to play for a while, maybe 3-6 months. And then you'll need to learn how to be a game master. So you'll need to learn all the rest of the rules and all the facilitation techniques and blah, blah, blah. So I imagine you'll be ready in about a year, right? And that wasn't possible for a working professional therapist who's never played these games before. So we knew that there was a need for a beginner's box, an intro for not just new players, maybe neurodivergent new players, but also a beginner's box for new facilitators, new providers. So Critical Core is that. It is what we saw the need of these therapists who needed a beginner's box to the world of therapeutic role-playing games. And also, it's the simplified rule set that we played with our participants for years. So this really is kind of the consolidation of those things. We put it on Kickstarter in 2019. And we had the support of an international ad agency out of Hong Kong, McGarry Bowen. And so they did our video. So the production quality on that Kickstarter was amazing. They helped us get the word out and things like that. So we had a tremendously successful Kickstarter, thanks in large part to the pro bono support of McGarry Bowen, who wanted to serve the community. So we had this super successful Kickstarter right before COVID. So then it took a long time to get all the production done, because production is, supply chains and all that happened in 2020. So it is now out in the world. It is available for sale at criticalcore.org. We have a physical kit that has all kinds of extra stuff in there. And then we also have the digital kit. You can get it and it comes to your computer via PDF immediately. Both of those are available. And what it has in the box is it has this simplified rule set that we talked about that's really good for new therapists, new facilitators, new teachers. We've had parents playing it. Actually recently had someone reach out from a organization on the East Coast of the United States in New York that was using it to provide therapeutic support to youth perpetrators of sexual violence. So not at all something that I had in mind when I was thinking how do I support the autistic community in Greater China, right? And yet people are finding really creative and interesting ways to use the Game to Grow method and to use Critical Core in their own communities. So that's been really, really fantastic. So it has its beginner's rule set in there. It has its facilitator's guide, which is the ways that we support our structure, the way that we build our sessions out. We have check-in questions, we have check-out questions, we have collaborative world-building techniques. All of that goes into the facilitator's guide, which also talks about the core capacities in greater detail. Then it also has story modules built into it. So this idea, this thing I said about crossing the bridge, right? Like examples, stories like that. There's 3 stories built into it that go into the box that are logical, sequential storylines. And so we built this story construction framework called the DOTS system, where in every encounter there's a desire, obstacle, tactic. So then, DOTS. And so every encounter is built into this really simplified structure, once again, so that someone with a family, with a built full therapy practice, all these complicating factors don't have to build an entire storyline for their players. They can play some of the games right out of the box.
Wow. Genius. Absolutely genius, Adam and Adam. So good. And then I know that you have a following of therapists that use this, that actually use it within their professional practices. So tell me about the feedback that they've given to you about Critical Core, and are there any maybe success stories, let's start there, that stand out to you that you could share with the listeners?
Sure. So one of the fantastic things about something like Kickstarter is we had it was an international project to get Critical Core created, but it also is an international success story. We have I've had people in Australia take a picture of the Critical Core box in front of the Sydney Opera House to show me that it's been implemented in various parts around the world. So that's been a really wonderful thing to see, and we've had requests, and it's very difficult to do this as a small regional nonprofit. Translating it into Portuguese, we've had requests at various parts of Europe to translate it. There's a big contingency of folks in the Nordic regions that have used tabletop role-playing games for a long time, and Critical Core is in English, and not everybody they want to use it with can speak English. There's a desire to do some translations in other parts of the world. We have our trainings. And the last trainings we did were in the fall, end of summer, and our trainings are. This last one was 3 sessions of 6 hours, and they're for their full day trainings. But we had people who were tuning in from Western Europe or Australia who were basically pulling all-nighters to attend these trainings, and that has been a really fun thing to see. And once the trainings happen, we have consultation groups where people who are implementing what they're learning from the Game to Grow trainings can use those. And so that's where they share the successes that they're working on, the challenges that they're having. And the most fun thing, I shouldn't say most fun, one of the most fun things for me is to see how the community is being built. Yeah. Because when Adam and I first started, we were the only people we knew doing anything like this. And that was 2013. So when we talk about it, 2013 was a lifetime ago, if you remember 2013. So people would say, Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, I know that's that weird game that weird kids played in the basement in the 80s, because the 80s had a tough time with Dungeons and Dragons. And yeah, it was a tough time. It was that game we played in the basement in the 80s and 90s. Now it's something different. We were always kind of on the front telling people and arguing for the benefits of collaborative storytelling games like Dungeons and Dragons. And now, 13 years later, since got started in 2011, it is a vastly different experience. So I'm seeing people, someone in Europe is talking to someone in Australia and someone in Detroit about how they're using these games, and they are talking about their own experiences, and they're sharing their wisdom with each other, right? So it doesn't have to go through Adam anymore, right? It doesn't have to go through us. It comes. they're connecting. So this vision of a better world through better games, right, is happening because we are building the community and the connection. That is a really beautiful thing to see. That it's sort of taking a life of its own in a way, which is really, as we look at our impact on the world that Game to Grow has had over the last decade, that is a really a testament to the power and potential of our mission. It's not just what are we doing, but it's how are we serving the people who are serving the people who are serving.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's beautiful. Well said. Really, really, really well said. I'm wondering about COVID-19 when you were talking there. I thought 2013 all the way through to 2020. And so how did COVID affect this model and you, Adam, kind of doing what you're doing, trying to get this out into the world?
So I like to say that COVID was something new, and it also reminded us who we already were in a way. So as COVID was coming on board, I'm in Seattle, and Seattle was one of the first places where we were first starting to get some lockdowns in the United States. It was kind of showing up here. So we were kind of aware of what was happening without really knowing what was happening. So we had, policies of hand sanitizer and masks for a while before masks were hip. We were maybe suggesting some masks here in Seattle before we really knew what was happening. And it was like so many people, we thought it was going to be 2 weeks. We were going to, when they first suggested we're going to not be gathering in places, so we were running our programs in person. Yeah. Up until maybe March or May of 2020. And we were gathering. I was taking all the dice and running them into hand sanitizer between sessions, wiping all the tables down with wipes. I mean, we were doing all of those sort of safety precautions that we were advised to do at the time. And then eventually it came to the point where we needed to just not do those gatherings in person anymore. And so what we did is we transitioned them to Zoom. And I had been doing trainings and consultations and things. I was aware of how Zoom worked. It was kind of a part of our lives already, even pre-2020. But then when we transitioned our programs online, I had to get Zoom accounts for all of our employees and teach all of the families how to get onto Zoom. Get Zoom nonprofit pricing, all of these different things, try to figure out how to run a program that was in person and is now virtual. And I'm going to be really honest, I was really nervous. Yeah. I thought it was only going to be 2 weeks. I thought it was going to be a month. I thought it was going to be 3 months. I thought it was going to be 6 months, but it wasn't. But I was really nervous at first because as a drama therapist who was, as I mentioned, I got my start in Africa, like in a very in-person setting in communities. Mike thought, now that we're in digital boxes, I'm pretty nervous. I'm not sure what that's going to be like. But it turned out, like I said, that COVID showed us what was already there. We were suddenly isolated, but we were already lonely. So what we discovered is when we were virtual, we were now able to be more accessible. There were a lot of kids in other parts of the country and the world, it turns out, that needed some social support. So when we were virtual, there were kids who could now, with mobility challenges, could now be fully present because they could be there virtually. We had some of our participants had struggles with echolalia, right? They would repeat things that other people were saying, and that was an obstacle to their full participation in programs. But now, virtually, they can mute themselves. Yeah. They can be fully themselves and use the technology to allow them to engage in the way. Those are all accessibility tools. We have screen readers. We have, closed captioning. All of these things allow for so much more accessibility. So really looking at the opportunity, speaking of failing forward, looking at the opportunities that were present in that moment. How can we leverage what we have here as an opportunity? So then Game to Grow expanded. We started running programs for people all over the country and all over the world. We had over 150 participants from all over the world playing every week in various games with our facilitators around the time. Really came to the point where we had to make a decision. Do we try to serve every single person in the entire world, or do we try to shift our model to really help more people? So that is in recent years, or in the recent year and a half or so, We've transitioned from trying to help every kid in every community around the world to how do we help communities around the world in a different way. So we really pivoted our program away from direct service more to the training and support that we do. So we have a lot more consultations, a lot more trainings, not just in the medical field, but also in the community sector. So Game to Grow just had this opportunity in the state of Washington to also train librarians. So I had an opportunity. I created a video training program for librarians so that they could watch, me teach them the aspects of the Game to Grow method. And then I traveled around the state. So I took a train to Southern Washington. I flew to Eastern Washington. I drove to Central Washington. I tried to planes, trains, and automobiles my way around the state to do these in-person full-day trainings. And I did a lot of improv with librarians, which was great fun. Because a lot of what we're working on with these librarians is not just the rules of the game. It's how do you support your community and help them come in, allow themselves to address loneliness and isolation, right? To not teach them how to be social, but help them be social in the ways that they want to be social and as much as they want to be social. That kind of social flourishing approach we talk about in our training program as well.
Yes. Wow. So exciting. Super inclusive as well, which is just wonderful. What's next, Adam? Like, where do you see you Game to Grow going next? Because obviously you've really kind of changed the model, but what's on the horizon?
That's a great question. So one of the things we've received in some feedback is, like I said, in my last training, we had people pulling all-nighters. So there is a demand for participation in this kind of training, this kind of modality. So the thing that I would really like to prioritize moving forward, and we have some things in the can that don't have dates on them exactly yet because there's a lot of moving pieces, but getting some on-demand videos. So what I provided to librarians was myself in front of a green screen, talking to some librarians and teaching them some of these methods. We actually just had someone come out to my office here in Seattle and film some proper training videos in the Game to Grow method, so that we can have people can take these video courses and then learn at their own pace, and then be able to rewatch. And I know when I watch training videos, I like to watch them at least once. I like to watch them double speed the first time and then watch them regular speed. And so we're going to be able to provide that. And just like I mentioned with the supports that we were able to provide using Zoom with screen readers and captioning and things like that, pre-recorded videos are going to be able to have that much more effectively than live transcriptions and things like that, right? So my goal is to get into more communities in farther parts of the world in more accessible ways, using the video on demand for the way that we can learn some of these programs, and then having the live workshops be something we can offer more regularly, because we have people who have had the learnings and now they need the experience. So being able to provide them that was another really great, amazing takeaway from the library trainings, is that we, as part of our full day trainings out in the world, they would get to play. So they played some of the games from Critical Core. And so these are librarians who have never played RPGs before, sitting down with other librarians from other parts of the state and getting to engage in this. And just like I mentioned, inside some of these consultation groups, these therapists from different parts of the country or the world are getting to connect and collaborate. I had different librarians from different parts of the state, and they were, what I saw them doing, and this is a testament to the power of this work, they were exchanging phone numbers, right? They were exchanging contact information, not just to be professional colleagues, but because they had fun playing together, right? And so this is the future. It really is. We've talked about, a better world through better games. And sometimes we talk about Game to Grow's mission is a game in every classroom, clinic, hospital, and home. The way that we want to be able to do that is to build the community, not to be the nonprofit on the hill, but to allow the work to do the work.
Oh, fantastic. And it's ongoing, right? It's just building and building and building. If somebody was listening to this episode and they're new to this world, what would you say to them? What would you tell them?
I would say one of the greatest things you could do is check out Critical Core. Critical Core is designed for you. It's designed for someone who is interested but new. It talks about the basic structures of the game format. It It's a game you can play with your family or your friends. You don't have to be a therapist to play it. In fact, it's absolutely not necessary. Like I mentioned, we've had lots of families playing it together. A lot of folks have purchased it for holiday gifts because it's a game that can play together as a family. So that's a great starting point is Critical Core. I would say if you want to get some more information, that is the first place I would send you. Also check out Game to Grow's website has a lot of other resources in terms of other podcasts we've done, other videos we've done, speaking presentations and things like that at various places. The keynote presentation of the Washington Association of Marriage and Family Therapy was not recorded, unfortunately, but there are lots of other recordings available online from not just myself, but other members of the historical Game to Grow team.
Yeah. Wow. I remember when you did that, actually. I wasn't there, but I heard about it through the community, and it obviously went well. So this is wonderful. It's wonderful. What about final thoughts, Adam? Share with the listeners maybe something that you haven't shared that you would like them to know. What are your thoughts?
Oh, that's a great question. I feel so put on the spot by that. I will say this. When I first started this work, I wasn't a parent. And so I would say we were, kind of chit-chatting in the so-called green room before we started recording today. And I was talking about my experience as a parent and how much that has like really informed so much of what I'm doing and given context for so much of what I've done historically. So what I feel, my oldest daughter right now is 2.5. And I remember when I suddenly had a kid who suddenly had social experiences and suddenly had needs, and I had to think about this person in a new way. As my daughter was growing up, I realized just how hard parenting can be, and just not only how hard parenting can be sometimes, but how challenging it can be to put someone else on your care team. I know that when I've thought about getting a babysitter or getting, a nanny or finding daycare, childcare, whatever that is, I really, really, really put a lot, my wife and I both have put a lot of time and energy into making sure we're making the right decision. And so I have realized just how much trust we have received from the families who have chosen to work with us over the years. And I feel so humbled and so honored by parents who were willing to try something, take a chance to see what would happen with their kids. I recently was talking to a mother whose son had been in my program from age 11 to age 17.
Oh, wow.
So I was a game master for this young person for their entire adolescence through teen years until they went to college. And so I was talking to this mother about her child's experience in our program, and I was just kind of now that I'm a parent, right, and I'm like getting emotional just thinking about this, how much that means for that parent to have trusted and seen the power of the work and then committed to it, both for their kid and to trust us to be able to provide that support, and what an honor it is to be included in that. So I guess my parting thought is this work is important and this work is hard, and it is important to remember that as we are making these decisions for the people that we care about, the people in our care, sometimes we've got to roll some dice.
That is the best.
I brought it back.
I love that. I love that. So my DT buddy, my great DT buddy, I just want to thank you so much for being here. This has been, I've learned a lot in this conversation, and thank you for sharing your expertise and Game to Grow and Critical Core with our listeners. I think that it is really important for it to be out in the world. Extremely therapeutic from what I've seen. So thank you for being here, Adam. I really, really appreciate it. And I know that the listeners will learn from this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you again.
You too, Adam. And so thank you to the listeners for being here. Please, please, please subscribe. There will be more content like this coming out very, very soon. But hopefully Adam has given you a new perspective on the powerful tool for growth and healing with great Game to Grow and Critical Core. It's really, truly inspiring. And I know that this is an innovative approach to a therapeutic interaction. Thank you, listeners. It is great to speak with you and to be here and to do this work. Take care of yourselves and each other. Bye for now.